Tenants in Oregon say that statewide rent control isn't good enough and they want to put tighter restrictions on what landlords can raise their rent to. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have an interesting story for you today, and it's coming out of one of the most anti-landlord places in the entire country, and that's the state of Oregon. Now, Oregon is one of those places where they don't believe that landlords should have any property rights. They think all landlords are evil, and they put a lot of laws and rules and regulations in place to try to keep the balance of power in the tenant's favor. And what has it done? It's made it so that landlords are having an absolutely horrible time there and are losing money. So they have a statewide rent cap in place. So they have statewide rent control in Oregon. And the funny thing about it was that it was actually somewhat good because it actually allowed landlords to raise their rent based on how much inflation there was. But the tenants this year in particular did not like that because since there was so much inflation, landlords could raise their rent nearly 15%. And a lot of tenants said, oh, we just can't afford that. So they want to put a cap on how much even inflation can cause a landlord to raise the rent. So, like I've told many people, it's a slippery slope when you put these rent control laws into effect. So for the landlords who say, oh, well, it's fair, they're allowing us to raise the rent by 10 or 15%. Well, they're going to look at that eventually and they're going to be like, hey, that's too much. So we're going to have to cut that back down lower. And that's exactly what's happening in Oregon right now. So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like and subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below and let me know what you think. Are you surprised? Okay, are you surprised that they say that the rent control is too lax, too easy on landlords, and they want to put even tighter restrictions on how much landlords can raise their rent? Are you surprised about this? I'm not, okay? I've been crying this stuff every time that a landlord's like, you know what, this is a fair rent control thing. I'll still be able to run my business, right? Well, eventually they're going to say it isn't fair. And because they've already gotten a rent control in place, it's so much easier just to say, well, we're going to make it even tighter. We're going to make it so you can raise your rents even less. We're going to make it even harder for you to operate your business. And eventually they're going to get to the point where, like some cities up in New York are doing, where they're like, no, we're not going to allow any increase. In fact, we're going to demand that you cut your rents. That's what the end goal is, basically to put you out of business. Make it so that all housing is socialized and they don't have to pay anything. That's what they want. So let's get into this article. It's quite interesting. This article is coming from the DemocratHerald.com and it says, tenants, landlords tussle over tighter rent cap. Yeah, tussle. Let's get into the article. Jessica Israel of Sherwood has taken her story to the Oregon legislature, which she hopes will further tighten the state's cap on annual rent increases, the latest battleground between tenants and landlords this session. The Senate Committee on Housing and Development already receives hundreds of statements for and against Senate Bill 611 in advance of a public hearing Monday and a scheduled work session Wednesday. During a work session, which is a public proceeding, lawmakers may amend and act on legislation, but they cannot accept new testimony. The bill proposes to change the annual cap that lawmakers approved in 2019. The current cap is the change in the Consumer Price Index plus 7%, as calculated by the Oregon Office of Economic Analysis, which came up with a permitted annual maximum increase of 14.6% for 2023. The bill proposes a new maximum of 8%, or the Consumer Price Index plus 3%, whichever is less. The current cap does not apply to buildings less than 15 years old, and the bill proposes to lower it to just 3 years. So yeah, this bill, right, keep in mind, they already got rent control there. They said that landlords could only increase their rent by 7% plus the increase in the Consumer Price Index, which just so happens for the last year since inflation has been out of control to have been nearly 15%. So tenants are like, no, 15% rent increase, that's insane. So just to give you, an example of how much that would be, if your rent is $2,000 a month and you decide to increase the rent by 15%, well, that's a $450 increase. So I'm sorry, I did my math wrong. That is a $300 increase. I was doing it like the rent was $3,000 a month. I'm not good at math, but the point is, right? Tenants say that increase is too much. And so they were like, no, we want to cap it at 8%. And that's only if inflation is high. So if inflation is low, they're not going to allow you to adjust upwards at all, and you'll be stuck at a 3% increase. So yeah, they basically want to cut us off at the knees at this point. Make it so that landlords are hardly able to raise rent at all. And not only that, but notice that they put a part in there about the cap doesn't apply with the current rent cap doesn't apply to buildings up to 15 years old. Well, they want to change that so that it doesn't apply to buildings only up to 3 years old. So brand new development would be stuck under rent control after a mere 3 years. What is this going to do? Okay, you already know that they're not building enough housing up in the state of Oregon. We already know this. It's going to tell developers, don't waste your time in the entire state. Okay, there's other states out there. This isn't worth putting your investment into because you're not going to be able to make any money. This property will be devalued after a mere 3 years. And landlords, they'll see the same thing. They'll be like, I'm not going to buy here. I'm not going to be able to increase my rents to cover costs in certain situations. You're going to be, just losing money just by being stuck under these rent caps. Remember, inflation last year was like 8%, okay? So if they don't allow landlords to raise rents in order to cover just their increases in costs, well, that means we're losing money. And we could easily fall into serious economic distress, lose our properties, go into bankruptcy, etc. Is this what they want? I think so. I think this is what they want. This is what the socialists want, at least. They don't want private property owners to be able to make money because they see us as being an unnecessary. They see the best move forward to be the government to own all the property, and it's not going to work. It's not going to work. So yeah, this is not surprising at all. Israel discussed her family's plight at a hearing brief sponsored by the Community Alliance of Tenants, part of the Stable Homes for Oregon Families Coalition of more than 30 organizations. And I'm not going to read it, okay? It's the same old hard luck, stupid story. Oh, my family went through this and that, and now we're struggling. Like, listen, it doesn't matter if your family is struggling or not. It doesn't, okay? Let's say the landlord has all his costs have increased on the building. His insurance, his property taxes, his utilities, how much he pays his contractors. Everything has increased. And with whatever you were paying your rent before, he can no longer afford to keep you there. The landlord is not a charity. The landlord is not a social welfare program. The landlord is a for-profit business and selling you a service. If you cannot afford to live there, you need to move. You need to move to somewhere you can afford. It is not the responsibility of us to make sure that you have somewhere to live. That is your responsibility, okay? And that's what I've always said. Simply put, we are not a charity. I'm going to skip over these next few paragraphs because this is just more, these hard luck tenant stories are ridiculous. 2-bill effort. Senate Bill 611 was one of 2 put forth by Stable Homes for Oregon Families, which also advocated legislation that would have reinstated a pandemic-era requirement for a 60-day eviction notice from landlords based on non-payment of rent, if tenants have filed official applications for rental assistance. It also proposed to extend the actual period for evictions from 3 to 10 days. Landlords also opposed that bill, which the committee considered back on January 30th. And yeah, that bill that's ridiculous. Okay, basically, you're extending everything out, but you know what? Nobody's saying, oh, well, we're going to cover the cost that the landlords are taking because of that. So if you want to extend the amount of time that landlords have to wait before they evict somebody, you know what you should do? You should also create a giant fund that will pay landlords the money that they are owed, okay? Because you're telling the landlord, no, you can't get paid, but you have to house these people. So I have to provide a service to people who aren't paying me. Do you go down to the grocery store? Well, you have to give me food until because I can't afford it. That's basically what they're telling landlords. Or you go to the car, nope, you can't repossess this car because I can't make the payment right now and I have to have a job. So you can't repossess the car until 2 months from now. No, they don't do that. They only do this sort of stuff to landlords, okay? The moment that your rent isn't paid, honestly, I believe we should be allowed to evict you right then. Now, obviously, there needs to be a process to actually move through the eviction process just to make sure everything is up to snuff and, no shady stuff is going on. But once that's done, we should be able to get you out of there immediately. That's my opinion. Okay, I don't think that we should have to sit on you sitting in our house for weeks or months on end until you get your stuff together. That's your fault. If you wanted to stay in there, you should have paid your rent on time. That's the way I've always seen things. So, yeah, they've got some more anti-landlord proposals out there. I wouldn't be surprised one bit if all of it passed. This is Oregon we're talking about here. And while the places outside of the major cities, Portland and Salem and, the college towns, etc., might be more conservative, might be more property, more concerned about property rights, we know that their votes are going to be overpowered by the people who are, these poor tenants, who are living in the big, really left-leaning cities in the state.